all the countries of the world, all the peoples of the world. It's very clear. Satan's agenda for a time will appear to be very thorough and complete around the entire world. And what's interesting, in Matthew chapter 24, what Jesus had to say said regarding the last days, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now, isn't that interesting? We know that there will be a world government in the last days, with Satan strongly influencing it, but also in the last days, this gospel will go out and cover the whole world. And in Matthew 28, the Lord gives us the commission to get that gospel and good news out. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age. How comforting that in the midst of the spiritual battle being waged, that our Lord will be with us to the very end of the age. And from a spiritual standpoint, nothing will happen to us. Satan cannot rob us of our eternity. He can persecute us in this world. There are parts of the world today where people are martyred for their faith in Christ, but in the next moment, they're in eternity with the Lord. And we have to grasp that and understand it. Well, I wanted to open up with those passages because they showed the global nature of what is taking place today. And I have titled this afternoon's message, Using Current Events to Share God's Truth. And I wanted to focus on globalization because this is such a key topic today. 20 years ago, people didn't talk about globalization, maybe in secret boardrooms, but not out in the open. Today, you can't turn on the evening news without seeing something going on, taking the world one step closer toward global government, whether it's with the economy and a one-world economic system, or the call for peace because of the way things seem to be spinning out of control in the Middle East and elsewhere. But this is something that we have to deal with and understand in our midst, the topic of globalization. And I believe if we're a little bit creative as Christians, we can use the current developments in this area as talking points to engage other people to start thinking about what is really going on behind the scenes and the spiritual ramifications of it. And I'll get to that part in the second half. But first of all, let's look at some of the things that are taking place. There's no question that we're moving toward a crisis point that will result in a global government system as the answer that is proposed to the crisis. Here you see some images of acts of terror and uprisings going on in the Middle East. A few short years ago, Israel was, relatively speaking, at peace. But now you have Gaza with Hamas, that thanks to pressure from the United States, Gaza was given back, and the people, 60% of them voted Hamas into power. So you have all kinds of weaponry coming from Egypt, Libya, other places flowing into Gaza. You have southern Lebanon now that is strongly under the influence of Hezbollah. Lebanon, not too long ago, there were quite a few Christian Arabs in Lebanon that at least had a working relationship with Israel. Not so today. Southern Lebanon hates Israel. They're ready to lunge. Then you have the whole mess in Syria. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. You've got weapons going from the United States through Libya, in some cases, to the Sinai, where Islamic jihadists are taking them and exporting them into Gaza and southern Lebanon. Even in Jordan, which is the one country around Israel that has been somewhat peaceful toward Israel, you now have al-Qaeda elements who have come from Iraq and Iran into Syria, and they're coming across the border into Jordan as part of the refugee movement. And Jordan doesn't know who's who. It's hard to distinguish who's actually part of al-Qaeda and not. So now, increasingly, there are uprisings being organized in Jordan. So even Jordan, to a degree, is beginning to be destabilized. So Israel's surrounded. No reason for fear. God knew this would happen. He's in control. But it's definitely a sign of the times. And it's setting the stage for more globalization down the road, because this is all going to come to a head. And someone's going to argue that we have to have world government to have world peace. That's going to be one of the arguments. Another area of the world right now is Ukraine. We are well connected in Ukraine. Our middle daughter, Olivia, and I were there years ago on a mission trip, made some friends, went back. I had the opportunity of speaking at the large Baptist church just not far away from Independence Square a number of years ago. But I think I mentioned yesterday evening that I'm part of an organization, on the board of an organization that has been involved in getting the Jewish people out of Russia and Ukraine back to Israel. And they've done so by the tens of thousands since the early 90s. And some of our people are on the ground in Ukraine, in Odessa and several other places. They've been reporting to us. And what has not come through in the media, except I've seen a little bit of this once or twice, but not much on it, is that the uprisings that first took place in Ukraine, there was a neo-Nazi element there. Putin was actually speaking the truth on that. There's a neo-Nazi element there. In fact, some of the rabbis in Ukraine urged their people to stay indoors for a few weeks, and even canceled school because they didn't want school children walking to school because of the increase in anti-Semitism. Satan is stirring the pot over there, and he's trying to bring things to a crisis point. So you have Russia and Ukraine now in a standoff. Then you have the looming world debt crisis. We talked a little bit about it yesterday evening. Trillions and trillions of dollars of debt that will never be paid off. And I believe that's the intent. The system has to crash, or at least appear to crash, for the powers that be able to introduce a new system, saying that, hey, we can't keep going like this. We have to have this new system, which is what they want. You have to create a problem to come in with a solution on your terms. That's Satan's oldest trick. And then, of course, there's the alleged environmental crisis. Even watching the Weather Channel these days, you get a full dose of the climate change agenda. Trying to move forward. There we go. It seems as if everything that's happening now that's out of the ordinary is because of global warming, and we have to have a world government to solve the global warming crisis. The fact of the matter is, and this is from some Christians who are scientists who've even testified before Congress, Dr. Kaufman being one of them, if humans did everything perfectly regarding the environment, we can only impact 3 to 5% of what happens. So in other words, if ocean levels will rise by 2 feet over the next 50 years, no matter what we do, they're still going to go up 1 foot 11 inches. And that's the part that is not being told us by the media. So the media is feeding this lie that humans are responsible for all of global warming. If we just get together, we can solve this problem, and we therefore need an empowered United Nations to do it. No, that's a lie. That's just another argument they're using to try to get us to go along with it. I personally believe that God is allowing these things to happen to try to get our attention, to say repent. But they are also a sign of the times. But what do all these things have in common? They're all being used increasingly as arguments for globalization in a coming world government. All these threats of crisis are pushing us toward a threshold, a climax of crises that I believe will result in a global system. Thousands of powerful people from around the world are actively involved in networking, in organizing conferences, and orchestrating international events for the very purpose of bringing about this new world order. I'd like to share with you a few of the current efforts that are moving us in this direction toward a false global unity. And I'm not going to share as many as I had planned to for the sake of time. I'm going to skip over a few of them, but I do want to take you through some of them because this is all taking place this year. And by the way, I want to say up front, the events that I'm going to share with you, about a dozen or so of them, it's the tip of the iceberg. There are over 100 meetings, one world, new age, interfaith meetings that we are aware of that have already taken place this year or are being planned. And millions of people are participating in these now, if you do the math all together. And so I want to walk you through this, and then again, go into how we can use these developments as talking points to share the truth with people. All right, back in January, this one did get some media attention, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Davos, Kloster, Switzerland, and for the last couple of times, they are now having regional meetings throughout the year as well. And you'll see it covers the whole world. Meeting in April in Panama, then in Istanbul, Turkey, and there was one in Nigeria a couple weeks ago, in the Philippines, and then in November in New Delhi. And the overall theme of the World Economic Forum and the people attending is the world's getting smaller, we need to globalize, we need to work together, but it's more than just this idea of cooperation, legitimate cooperation. There's an agenda behind it, a very strong economic agenda. On January 26th, there's a meeting in Detroit, Michigan, called the World Sabbath of Religious Reconciliation. This was celebrated in Detroit's Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. The World Sabbath of Religious Reconciliation is a Michigan-based interfaith event, quote, seeking to build a world of tolerance, justice, faithfulness, and peace. To make it sound good on the surface. Readings, offerings of prayers from many beliefs, and music from a variety of world faiths formed the backbone of this interreligious experience. The Jewish shofar was blown, Hindu dancers performed, and the Muslim call to prayer was chanted. Throughout the World Sabbath, youth played an integral part, participating in the songs, dances, readings, and prayers, and through a special Children of Peace processional. The devil loves to use children whose parents put them up to it because it creates the effect of innocence. It makes it look good and legitimate when it's not. A big part of the global agenda is interfaithism, because if there's going to be a global system, a world government, somehow the world's religions have to be brought together for that to work. And Bible-believing Christianity has been the biggest challenge for Satan, and he's putting more and more of the effort there because Christians have stood in the way of these developments. February 14th through the 16th, this was held across the United States. It's called the National Preach-In on Global Warming. This particular weekend in mid-February was set aside as a time for religious leaders across the U.S. to speak out regarding climate change. Hundreds of pastors and teachers from different denominations and religions delivered sermons on global warming, the need to change behaviors and values, and the desire for a united world response to stem climate change. Now, the organization that's coordinating this national preach-in was called Interfaith Power and Light. The emphasis on the word light there is interesting. I believe it's more than a coincidence. And in occultic circles, light has a whole different meaning, as most of you know. And the Bible warns us that Satan comes as an angel of light. Now, the irony in all this was that our nation was in a decrease when this event on global warming took place. And I have to admit, I got a certain level of satisfaction out of that. We just come out of one cold spell and went right into the next one as the meeting ended. But nonetheless, people are buying into all of this. On February 17th to the 23rd, in India and worldwide, was held Hindu Environment Week. This was a week-long series of meetings and promotions. It originated with something called the Bhumi Project, B-H-U-M-I, the Bhumi Project, a Hindu ecology program launched through the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, hosted this first Hindu Environment Week. Partnering with Oxford University and the Alliance of Religions and Conservation, an interfaith ecology organization started by Prince Philip. The Bhumi Project and its Hindu Environment Week was a launching pad for conferences, seminars, and other activities aimed at promoting a green consciousness within the global Hindu community. While India was the nation most impacted, the scope of the week was global, with involvement from other corners of the world. One outcome will be the launching of the Green Temple Handbook. And the purpose of all this is to make Hindus worldwide activists. Many Hindus have been passive over the years. We know what they believe, but they haven't necessarily been militant about what they believe. That's going to change if these people have their way. They want to turn the world's 1 billion Hindus into environmental activists pushing the cause of global government. So be looking for that in the next 2 to 3 years. Another meeting took place in the UK, in London, called Anticipating 2025. This was hosted by an organization called Humanity Plus, along with the London Futurists. It was a 2-day conference with 18 expert speakers. They explored the area of transhumanism, the technologically driven evolution of humanity, and the rush to shape our global future. Basically, in essence, trying to turn man into God. And some of the speakers have and will be addressing this issue of transhumanism. But it's taking modern day technologies and using it to advance what mankind can do, and ultimately to try to make man immortal. Very strong occult overtones. Some of the speakers at these types of conferences make no bones about where they're coming from spiritually. So it's kind of a mixture of humanism and occultism. Speakers included the chairperson of Humanity Plus, Natasha Vita-Moore, also Anders Sandberg from Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute, also David Wood, the pioneer of the smartphone, and Ben McLeish from the Zeitgeist movement, and a lot of other prominent people who were there as well. April 9th through the 12th in Belgium, there's a meeting called Business for Peace, Strategies for Hope. Meeting on the anniversary year of World War I, this important conference took place to commemorate the war to end all wars. The event was a joint venture between the Globalization for the Common Good Initiative and the European Peace Forum, and brought to the table a gathering of business leaders, scientists, human rights experts, and governmental officials, including the President of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, who spoke on Europe as a peace project, and Mark Eyskens, the ex-Prime Minister of Belgium. 2 spiritual thinkers, Franciscan Thomas Dienberg and Buddhist Zoltan Valzizak, tackled the subject of spirituality, ecology, and peace. One of the highlights of the conference was the launching of the Charter of Hope. They're big on position papers, charters, that type of thing, and they get a lot of signatures on these things, and the media picks up on it, and they take it worldwide. But many of the world's top power brokers were involved in this meeting. You probably had no idea that this many meetings were going on under our noses on the environment, interfaithism, the political side of the One World movement. But ever since the year 2000, it's been gaining a lot of momentum. That was kind of the year that it launched out and began going public. Prior to the year 2000, most of these developments were behind the scenes. But now gradually, this is all coming out of the closet. This next meeting was interesting. It took place on May 2nd through the 6th. Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Nature, Our Responsibility. It was held at the Vatican. This Pope is very much involved in this agenda. Bringing together leaders from the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, this multi-day workshop examined the state of the human-nature relationship at the international level. A host of topics were explored, including alternative economic models for sustainable development, the issue of overpopulation, climate change and extreme weather events, protecting biodiversity, globalization and democracy, and international governance of the global commons. That's huge. The global commons involves, for example, our oceans. And the people pushing global government want to get control of that first and then put a tax on it. So that people, for example, fishing in the Atlantic will have to pay a tax on all the fish that they pull out of the ocean in a given week. And they want to use this taxation to begin to put in place a serious form of world government. There are numerous forms of international taxes that are being considered. But if they can control the global commons, that's the first big step. And the Vatican is fully behind it. But this Pope knows how to play the media. He's very popular. He's also the first Jesuit ever to be Pope, which I believe is significant. I have some conservative Catholic friends who told me years ago, going back 20 years, that whoever this Pope would be, at this number Pope, whatever his number is, I forget, how many popes have there been?
112.
Okay, that this pope would be in power when the global system would come together and would be part of it and endorse it. And it is lining up. It appears that that might be the case. I'm not saying it will be, but it very well could be. May 19th through the 23rd, there was a very significant conference held in Astana, Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is becoming one of the top 2 or 3 meeting places for globalists in the entire world, which that surprised me. I don't know if that's a surprise to you or not, because Kazakhstan seems to be so off the beaten path, you wouldn't expect it to be a place where these kinds of major meetings are held. But political leaders from that country are working hard to turn Astana, its capital, into a mecca for internationalism by hosting major world events there promoting global government. In 2013, more than 12,000 delegates attended the forum. It now rivals the World Economic Forum in Switzerland as being the most important meeting of the year for global politicians and economic leaders pushing the world government agenda. I'm going to skip forward. I'm just going to say they talked about the new global financial architecture there, the coming world economic system. They sought to implement the Astana Declaration, a roadmap document that calls on radically strengthening global governance, integrating world markets, and creating a new global financial architecture. That was the most important thing that came out of this last meeting. You had top leaders from the World Bank, the IMF, and delegates of national governments who were there. Moving on, in Melbourne, Australia, a couple of weeks ago, May 26th through the 29th, Paths to Dialogue in Our Age. Drawing from the precedent of Vatican II, the Center for Interreligious Dialogue at Australian Catholic University is building on the historical push to advance global interfaithism. Toward that end, the center hosted an international theological conference to celebrate interfaith development, also to explore new approaches and consider challenges. Global oneness through religious cooperation, world unity and peace, and the well-being of humanity and the entire cosmos in our age was the underlying theme that resonated through this event. Again, pushing interfaithism, trying to bring the religions of the world together, saying we all really worship and serve the same God. June 19th through the 21st, less than about a week away, Istanbul, Turkey. There will be a meeting, global governance, engaging new norms and emerging challenges. The United Nations will be directly involved in that meeting, and I think we'll probably get some media coverage. So be looking for some announcements in late June regarding that meeting. And it will have to do with managing international cooperation toward global government. Then on July 1st through the 3rd in the United Kingdom, there will be a conference called Earth System Governance. And this also is a power grab, trying to gain full authority over 4 key areas of our lives. And this is through the Earth System Governance Project. Again, most people haven't heard of these things, but it doesn't make them any less real. The Earth System Governance Project. Their goal in partnering with the United Nations University and the International Council for Science and the International Social Sciences Council is to target these 4 areas: global water systems, global food systems, global climate systems, and global economic systems. If you control those 4 areas, you can pretty much do what you want, and that's their goal. Finally, see, I'm going to skip over that one. We already covered that. In Indonesia, let's go to Bridging Borders and Boundaries, Detroit, Michigan. Hosted by the North American Interfaith Network, this conference will bring together religious leaders from Canada and the United States to pursue interfaith cooperation and the ideal of religious equality. At this particular conference, it's expected that they will venture over to the Islamic mosque and perhaps hold a service there. We'll have to wait and see if that happens, because Detroit, as you know, has become a major bastion for Islam in the United States. And then, as you see, the meeting in Indonesia, the Global Forum of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, along the same lines of what we've already discussed. And then the last one I wanted to touch on is the Congress of World Religions will be holding their Secretariat session where, once again, Astana, Kazakhstan. The purpose of this meeting to promote global peace and world unity through the collective work of religions. That's the alleged purpose. To aid world religions in this global unity agenda, the Congress of World Religions established an international secretariat based in Astana and attached to the government of Kazakhstan. It's actually an arm of their government. This September, the Secretariat, an important group with representatives from Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, and Taoism, is hosting its 13th session, which they believe will be a breakthrough session in the area of interfaithism. So this gives you an idea. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I flew through these because of the limited time we have, but I did want to give you an idea of what is going on behind the scenes around the world. They've managed to take in every country, every religion, these powers, and the money behind it is huge, coming from major foundations. You've got groups like the Rockefeller, Carnegie, complex foundations pouring money into the One World movement, and just about every major foundation in the country is now directing a good part of its funding toward the promotion of globalization. So these people don't lack money and resources. Now, as we are now aware of these things, the challenge is how can we use this type of information, these very real developments taking place around the world, and communicate them to other people in a creative way that brings about a positive response. So I'm calling this next section, The Danger of Losing Our U.S. Freedoms and Sovereignty to a Global System of Government. 5 reasons to be concerned about a new world order. Now, speaking from one believer to another, I know and you know that these things are going to take place. It's been prophesied, it's going to happen. We're not going to stop it. However, we can use it, again, to help bring some discernment to people and help them to understand that ultimately this is a spiritual battle and they need to wake up and get on the right side. That should be our goal in all of this. Oftentimes when I travel and I'm flying, almost every single time, God will put me next to a person who likes to talk with me, and I don't resist that. I pray for opportunities. Unless I'm dead tired, I say, Lord, please don't put a person next to me who's going to ask me questions. But usually I'm open to this because it's a great opportunity to witness. And so people will ask, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a writer and speaker. What do you write on? International, political, economic, and religious trends. Oh, really? Well, where do you think the world's headed? And then it gives me an open door to begin talking about some of these things. And so if we're a little bit creative, we're really just a couple steps away from being able to discuss these kinds of things with people. You can use a headline from the news that day, something in a newspaper, book you've just read, all kinds of ways to get people on this subject. And then I begin, as the Lord leads, to share 5 main points regarding globalization and why this is not a good development. And it starts with the most simple ones and then moves toward the spiritual. And I'm going to take you through these very quickly. And by the way, in a moment, but not yet, I'm going to have my son Christian give you a handout that has all these 5 points that you're going to see up here written out on one sheet of paper. Okay? So you'll have, I think we have about 25 copies. It should be enough. Couples, if you could just take one between you, I think we'll be okay. All right, point 1. In order to merge the U.S. into a one-world political, economic, and religious system, our current delicate system of checks and balances that our founding fathers so carefully established would be eliminated. People don't stop to think about this, but if there is one government over the entire world, our current system of checks and balances are gone. Where do you run and hide if that world government is no good? There won't be any place left because all the countries of the world would be under. It's like putting all your eggs into one basket. The people who are going to be sitting on top of this world government will not have our best interests in mind, I assure you. So the whole argument of checks and balances is a legitimate one, and one that we should bring up before people. Point 2. Our U.S. Constitution, which has served us so well, giving us more freedom and opportunity to pursue happiness, prosperity, and religion than any nation in history, would have to be abolished or significantly altered in order to clear the way for world government. Therefore, it could no longer offer protection to U.S. citizens. Again, this is something most people don't think of. People that push the global agenda naively, who are not in high-level positions in organizations, but are just kind of naively buying into this, they're all about world unity and world peace. They're not thinking where this will all lead and what the ramifications will be, but this is just one more. Point number 3, we would have a weaker voice in government, less power to govern ourselves. The world government power base would either be in New York City to start, or more than likely Europe. So if you are upset now about U.S. elected officials in Washington not listening to the American people, imagine how much worse it will be if a group of international bureaucrats are running our lives, possibly from another part of the world. They will have their own agenda and be far less apt to obey the wishes of the American people or protect our individual rights and freedoms. If anything, they will see us as a thorn in their side and be inclined to deal harshly with resistors, primarily conservative Christians and Jews. Now, this is where I first bring up the religious element. I want the person I'm talking to understand that this is an agenda, and this agenda is hostile toward Christians and Jews. Usually I don't say much more than that right then. I let them talk a little bit and ask some more questions. But it's important that they get this. I think at this point in our country, most people, not all, but most people, still would say that World War II was horrible and that Hitler was a bad guy. And as a result, in their minds, the idea of a movement being overtly, very strongly anti-Jewish, anti-Christian scares even some non-Christians. Now that's beginning to change because we're having more and more open and flagrant satanic activity and people who just make no bones about it, who are just devoted to Satan. But for the most part, people have enough sense left that they identify certain things still as evil. And so at this point, you want to plant that seed in their minds. And it's true. This one world movement and its highest levels is anti-Christian and anti-Jewish. The fourth point will hit people in their pocketbooks. And sometimes in America, that's what you have to do to draw a response, unfortunately. If you mess with people's money, now you have their attention. An international tax would be imposed to fund this coming world government system. If an entirely new overarching layer of government is added to our current city, county, state, and federal governments, it will have to be paid for somehow. International planners have already discussed various types of taxes, such as collecting percentage fees based on the value of international currency transactions, the cost of airline travel, the consumption of water, even if you have your own well. A few years ago, the UN was seriously looking at this, and they got a lot of pushback, so they put it on the back burner for a while. That even if you have your own well, based on the amount of water you're drawing out of it, they wanted you to pay a tax on it. All along with an international income tax that would likely begin as a 1% to 3% tax and quickly increase from there as the international bureaucracy expands. See, people don't think that this world government has to be funded somehow. And guess who's going to have to pay for it? All of us common folks, through taxes. Even some one-worlders react negatively to that, people that are normally in favor of the agenda, because they realize ultimately it's going to cost them something financially as well. In addition, some world government advocates are proposing that all individuals be forced to have a microchip embedded in their bodies, which will enable the global administration to track everyone at all times. This chip would also be necessary in order to complete any financial transactions, all buying and selling. Now at this point, even non-Christians may see there's some biblical prophetic overtones in this. The fact that everybody will have to take some type of mark to be able to buy or sell. By the way, before I go any further, I was an economics major in college, and in my money and banking textbook, written by two advisors to the Federal Reserve, this was around 1980, in the last chapter, it looked to the future of the world's banking system. And they said that the day will come, in the not very distant future, where every person will be tagged with the number they will need to have to be able to buy or sell. It was actually in my money and banking book back in 1980, so this has all been many decades in the making. Now this next story, it's not going to be on the screen, and you can feel free to share this if you like. You have to commit it to memory, but this is an experience I had a couple years ago with someone on our mailing list, a doctor from the state of Wisconsin, a Christian lady who has a real heart and burden for other people and wants to share the gospel with them. And her aunt married a second time to a gentleman who was quite a bit older than her. He was close to 80 years old, and he was not a believer. But he had founded a high-tech company, was a multi-millionaire, very successful, and his company was involved in facilitating and doing contract work for a company in the United States that is manufacturing en masse a computer chip, which they believe it will actually be one that will be embedded in humans. I know this sounds way out there, but this is actually taking place. So our friend, this Christian lady, was together at a family gathering with her relatives, and it included this gentleman, this entrepreneur from the Northwest. And being the enthusiastic Christian that she is, and knowing that he does not know the Lord, she began to try to share the gospel with him over the Thanksgiving meal. And so try to picture about 8 or 10 people sitting around a dinner table, and she's not at all an obnoxious person that hammers you over the head. She is a sensitive person, so I know she was tactful in how she shared things with this gentleman. But the point came where he snapped, and this old man in his 80s reached across the table, grabbed my friend by the throat, and began to choke her. And his wife, this lady's aunt, was trying to pull him off of her. And as all of this is going on, he said, these were his words, "If it wasn't for you, the blankety-blank Christians, we'd have already gotten what we want. But you keep getting in the way. Maybe once you've all been dealt with, we can finally accomplish our goal." End quote. So there are people who understand exactly where this is going and what they're doing. There is that just outright evil element. Most people, I believe, are naively involved in this movement, but there are those who know what they're doing. This guy wants to get this mark, this chip, out there and into people because he believes that's the only way that his types will be able to control the world and take the world in the direction that they want to take it. This was about 2 years ago that this happened. Point number 5. Those persons who have been at the forefront of pushing for an international form of government during the last 70 years have consistently been anti-Christian and anti-Jewish in their political and religious worldview. We're talking about the leaders at the forefront of this movement. If we've learned from history, it is reasonable to assume that those trying to impose a new form of government will also be the ones calling the shots once the system is in place. So an awareness of their religious background, political and organizational affiliations, both public and secret, and personal beliefs and motivations gives us a good idea of what they will do once in power, i.e. Hitler's Mein Kampf. He basically spelled out what he wanted to do. Most people didn't believe it, and he ended up doing it. When you look at some of the major foundations supporting this effort, where the money is coming from, and what the people who head up those foundations believe, it should give us a real good idea of where it's headed. There's a great amount of anti-Semitism and hatred for Christians involved. They see us as being their main obstacle to be overcome, and they can't wait to deal with that with us. As an addition to point 5, sometimes I go on to share that Hitler was a follower of Helena Blavatsky, who wrote a book called The Secret Doctrine, which today is considered still by many to be maybe the #1 occult classic of the last couple hundred years. She also published Lucifer magazine. Now, we actually document this on page 24 of my book, The New World Religion. So there can be no doubt about where she's coming from. What few people are aware of is that Hitler kept a copy of her book, The Secret Doctrine, at his bedside, and he scribbled notes in the margins. It became, in effect, his Bible. He was strongly influenced by the occult, especially Blavatsky and some of her teachings that he was introduced to by some of his advisors who were also heavily involved in the occult, like Himmler and others. Blavatsky's eventual successor at the Theosophical Society, which she headed, would be Alice Bailey. Bailey, who today is referred to by some as the mother of the New Age movement, founded Lucifer Publishing Company in the early 1920s in New York City, then changed the name 2 years later to Lucis Trust. That organization still exists today and it is very instrumental within the United Nations. And I know this directly from a friend of mine who attended a UN meeting when Kofi Annan was still in power, where the literature from Lucifer Publishing Company, actually Lucis Trust, was distributed with the knowledge of UN leaders at the conference. They were allowed to have a book table out in the lobby, and they were allowed to promote their international prayer called the Great Invocation. And their goal is to get millions of people praying the same prayer at the same time, using occult meditation, going into a trance and focusing on trying to bring in the world teacher to take his seat of power. And they believe if they get enough people doing this at the same moment in time, there will be a major breakthrough, so to speak, in the heavenlies, and this world teacher will come and take his seat of power. Of course, they're described in the Antichrist, but sometimes they refer to him as the Christ or the coming world teacher. This was at a UN event. This organization has influenced a number of political groups. I don't have time to go into all that this afternoon, but they're a significant organization. They're very real. And so again, this shows you the spiritual side of the one world movement. Ultimately, I've discovered that religion drives politics, not the other way around. What people believe determines what they will do politically and who they vote for. So religion has everything to do with this. And it shows the motivation ultimately behind it as well. This is a satanic agenda to try to take control of the world and put Satan in charge. And for a time being, things will be, as the Bible makes very clear, very difficult on planet Earth. But the good news is, we know that Jesus is going to return. He's going to put a stop to this, and he's going to reign for 1,000 years on planet Earth. And so again, the worst thing that can happen to us is that we would have to put our lives on the line. And is that really so bad? Many other Christians over the years have had to do so, and they take the body but not the soul. We in our family, we've tried to prepare our children to take a strong stand for the Lord. Because with what I do, we'd be naive to think that I would be some kind of a target. And if things go down, and I'll tell you, we've had things happen in the last few years. Our kids are old enough now that we talk about it. When they were little, we didn't, because we didn't want them to be fearful. But we've had our cars tampered with twice in our driveway. We had to have the local police come out and take down what happened. Another time we had an Islamic radical group hack into our website and totally wipe it out. First, actually, they left a message saying why they were defacing our website, and then a couple hours later they actually put death threats on there and then shut the whole thing down. This was back right after 9/11, a few months after that. We've had our phones tapped into and wired. In fact, we caught an individual doing it a couple of years ago from AT&T. My wife wondered what the truck was doing outside of our house, and I said, well, the neighbor just moved in next door. Maybe they're just setting his phones up and everything. And so she said, yeah, you're probably right. And so I went downstairs and I was standing looking out over our kitchen sink, and all of a sudden I see the top of somebody's head bobbing. So I slid up the window and he didn't hear me. There's a guy from AT&T messing around on the back of our house. I said, hey, what are you doing? He said, I'm just hooking up your internet. I totally caught him off guard. He was fumbling for words. I said, I didn't know we were having a problem. As far as I know, everything was working just fine. I said, but maybe my wife knows something I don't. Let me ask her. And I turned to get ready to call out to Audrey. He said, no, it's okay. I just got the wrong house number. Closed up his book and practically ran out of there without even looking if he got the wrong address. He was in such a rush, he left a piece of his equipment behind on our air conditioning unit sitting next to the phone area. And then soon after that, we noticed weird things going on with our telephones. I also found out from some talk show host friends of mine that some things were going on with them as well, at least several of them. Now this was over a year before the Edward Snowden stuff went public. But I can tell you, there's been an enormous abuse of power in this country, way bigger and far beyond anything that took place with Watergate. And they're getting away with it. And part of the reason for that is it's the times we're living in. I believe this agenda is racing forward now. It's going to continue to, there will be some bumps along the road for them where they have to pull back for a while and then move forward in a different way. But pretty much everything is in place. 20 years ago when I wrote my book, In Route to Global Occupation, I knew we still had some time. There were certain things that had to happen and come into place. Now, it's all pretty much right there. So if the Lord allows it, things could happen and move forward very quickly. And I personally, I hate making predictions. I stay away from it. I don't set timetables. I'll leave that in the Lord's hands. But I'll just say this. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 18 months to 2 years, there'll be some major developments in the world because things are just getting ready to pop. So what does that mean for us as believers? If you read 1 Peter 3:15, but in your heart set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Do you realize we as Christians are the Lord's salt and light in this world? Amen. If we don't present the hope of Christ spiritually, the hope of eternity, people aren't going to get it from anybody else. We have a huge task, and it's an exciting task, though. It's not something we should shy away from or be afraid to do. God has given us the truth, life-saving truth, and He has commissioned us to share that with others and to put this hope before them. And to use every means within our power that is legal, every creative fiber in our being. The Lord's given us all different talents and abilities. And He's put all these current events in front of us. Use them. Use them to witness to people and share the gospel. So, yes, we're living in difficult times, but they're also exciting times. I believe today, personally, it is much easier to have the faith to believe in the Lord than at any other point ever. Because we are seeing in front of us the fulfillment of Bible prophecies that were given over 3,000 years ago. How can a person not believe? If you really understand what's going on, it's almost as if how can people not believe? And I know the sin nature has a hold on people, but if we put all the facts out there in a reasonable way, I think a lot more people will come to accept Christ because they will begin to see what is really taking place and see the spiritual warfare being fought over them. And nobody wants to be on the wrong side once they understand what's going on. They want to be on the right side. You've taken in so much information in the last few hours. Your minds are probably spinning. And I want to wrap it up here. And I will be around at the book table for a while afterwards if you have any questions. But would you stand with me, and then I'm going to wrap up with prayer. Is there one more speaker before we break to eat? All right. Let's stand anyway. Let's give everybody a stretch here, and let's close in prayer before my good friend Russ comes up to share. Lord God, even though we know you, that you are our Father, and that you sent your only begotten Son on our behalf, in our human minds, we can't even begin to get our arms around your greatness. You are such an awesome God. You have only our best interests in mind, and you love us. Help us to understand that every step of the way, and to know that you are in control, that nothing shakes you, and at the end you will still be in control. Lord, help us to share the hope that we have within us through you. Empower us, strengthen us, give us creativity, help us not to be lazy, Lord, in sharing the gospel and seizing opportunities to do so, to share the good news of Jesus. Make us bold, Lord. Give us boldness, even like John the Baptist, Lord, not to be afraid to declare the truth, sometimes very boldly when we have to, other times more subtly and creatively, Lord. Give us your wisdom and discernment in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Amen.